All right, so now we'll move to soybean insect pests that we may find in a soybean field at a given time in Alabama. And so for this presentation, Dr. Smith and I will kind of just go back and forth a little bit, talking about the different pests, giving a little information as needed. So the tools of the trade are pretty similar for soybean scouting as they are for cotton scouting. Again, record keeping is very important, as is having the proper sampling equipment. A lot of sweep nets is what our thresholds are based on in soybeans. We do have some per row foot, which would be the drop cloth. And again, staying hydrated, protecting yourself from the sun and things like that are very important. Anytime we go out into a field by ourselves, make sure folks know where we are and when we should be somewhere else and things like that. So also similar to cotton, there can be a whole lot of bugs in a soybean field at a given time. So it's important that we kind of have an understanding of the different growth stages and timings, what bugs are important, what bugs aren't. Some are important when you see them in the seedling stage, but less important when you get to the reproductive stage. So it's just important to kind of have a good idea for that. We may see cutworms, three-cornered alfalfa hoppers, grasshoppers, kudzu bugs, a lot of different caterpillar pests that Dr. Smith talked about during the cotton portion. Different defoliating beetles may be in our fields, and certainly stink bugs can be in the mix as well. So there's just some different things to think about, and got our different reproductive growth stages there. Personally, I like the reproductive stages of cotton easier. It's a little bit easier to just say first week of bloom, second week of bloom than it is all these R1, R3.5, that kind of stuff. But it is important that we have a good general knowledge. R1 is going to be when we find an open flower anywhere on a plant on 50% of the plants in the field. R3 is when our pods are 3/16 of an inch long in the upper four uppermost nodes. R5, they say, is when the seed is 1/8 of an inch long on one of the four uppermost nodes of the plants. R6 is full seed. A pod contains a green seed that fills the pod cavity in one of the four uppermost nodes. And then R8 is when 95% of the pods have reached mature pod color, going from green to the tan or brown. And generally at that point, you're within a week to 10 days of hopefully being able to harvest the crop. So the three-cornered alfalfa hopper is one that is very, very common to see in our soybean fields. You walk around or run your sweep net, and they're jumping everywhere, and we get pretty excited about them at times. You see the adult there on the left, kind of a triangular-shaped green insect. The immature on the right is much smaller and kind of spiny or hairy looking, still a green color. The adults are highly mobile. They, like I said, they jump around big time walking through the field. The immatures are they're pretty docile. They're where they are on the plant, and they don't they don't jump around and move a whole lot once they get where they are. So here's just some classic symptoms of what we see from three-cornered feeding in soybean fields. You see the girdling here. This big knot is caused by the adults or the immatures will attach themselves to the stem and work their way around, feeding, sucking juices from the stem, and it leaves this knot, which can reduce the movement of photosynthesis and things up and down the plant. And then oftentimes we don't necessarily realize we had an issue with three-corners until later in the season when we've got a good pod set and a windstorm comes through, or we're going through sweeping with our sweep net and plants start breaking over. It can be tempting to try to get a revenge spray on those guys at that time, but that damage was likely done during the seedling stage. So really not a lot you can do once you're walking through a field, at our R5, if plants are lighting over, that damage was done a long time previous to when you're seeing the symptoms. So kind of the last slide we've got on three corners here, they tend to be worse when beans are following a cover crop or reduced tillage. It's a good situation for the three corners to really develop and already be in the field, and then you plant into it, and there they are. Our insecticide seed treatments can provide some suppression of the girdling. Overall, our damage potential is pretty low. They'll feed on the main stems and seedling soybeans, and then later on they may feed on petioles, cause leaves to drop and things like that. In the seedling stage, our threshold is just when stands are threatened. So that's kind of what your targeted plant population is, and when you feel like that's threatened, you may want to intervene. When beans are 10 inches or taller, the threshold is 2 per sweep. So that means if you do sorry, we're getting a little feedback from somebody here. You could please make sure you're muted, if you don't mind. But anyway, so our threshold is 2 per sweep. So that means if you do 100 sweeps, you would need 200 three corners to hit threshold. And there's been a lot of research done that suggests that you could probably go up to maybe even 5 per 1 sweep. So that would be 500 in a set of 100 sweeps. So they're out there. They look exciting when you're in the field and they're jumping around, but not real likely that we're probably going to need to make any applications. I don't know if you got anything to add to that, Dr. Smith.
I would just say I think the real susceptible time for three-cornered is when they're in a real early stage, right after they emerge. The girdling there can have an impact, but I think later in the season, when the numbers get real high and we find them then, I don't think they're really very economic at that point.
And one good thing about soybeans with three corners compared to cotton is you can have some compensation with plants around it. You can get away with that. So.
One thing I thought I noticed last year on one of our research farms where I was looking at some plantings for a three-cornered is I kind of saw a border effect. I'm not sure they always evenly distribute across the field either.
All right, so moving into our next pest, if the slide will advance. There we go. So now talking a little bit about kudzu bugs. So these are a somewhat new pest for us that are invasive. Started moving in several years ago now, and they're pretty widely established at this point. You see the adult here is just kind of olive green color. Maybe resembles a very small stink bug a little bit. Can certainly produce a similar smell to stink bugs. They're a big congregate insect. So, when you see one, you'll see a bunch of them oftentimes up and down plant stems. So they are stem feeders. That's primarily where they're getting their nutrients from, sucking juices out of the stems. Here's an image of an immature kudzu bug. It's kind of a flat, tannish color. Appears to be very heavy when you see it. And that's really the key, what we're looking for when we're making treatment decisions. And here is an image, if you can see, of the eggs with a fresh hatchling. So they lay kind of barrel-shaped eggs, but they're laid sideways in rows of 2, and they're kind of a whitish color. Then you'll see the small yellow immatures when they first hatch, which kind of turn into more of this tannish green color that you see. So we're generally the first generation is going to develop on kudzu before it moves into soybeans. So that's kind of where they're coming from. The kudzu is a pain for a lot of reasons, and these new pests are certainly one of them. from egg to adult can take them anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, just depending on temperature and things like that. Generally, they kind of build on field edges before they move into the field, so it's important that when we're scouting, we're not just looking at the first 10 rows. We're moving into the field and making sure that they're widely distributed. This is another one, Dr. Smith, that's really important, that we wait until we see the immatures, particularly when the beans are in the reproductive stage a little bit later, because they can continue to reinfest the field. But once those immatures hatch out, they're stuck there. They can't fly. They can't really move around out of the field. So at that point, you can make a well-timed spray and control these things. Our threshold prior to R1, prior to flowering, is 10 per plant. From R1 to R6, we're looking at 1 immature per sweep. So again, that's, if I do 100 sweeps in the field, that's 100 immature kudzu bugs.
I might just say that they seem to resurge this year in numbers. It's been going down for several years after the initial movement into an area. But this year, for some reason, they came back in pretty high numbers. But we saw the disease occurring a couple of weeks ago now in the Prattville area of central Alabama.
So this Bavaria fungus will move in and does a pretty good job of cleaning up these kudzu bugs. So that's something that, as Eddie talked about, our beneficials. This is certainly one of the things that helps us fight these guys. And it's pretty impressive when it moves in, takes hold. It can really take care of these kudzu bugs quick. So we got a question about the QR code. I'll show that again in just a second. At the end of this presentation, we'll show that again. So now I don't want to spend just a whole lot of time talking about the foliage feeding beetles that are out there, but we do see several. One is the bean leaf beetle. You see image here of a couple of different looking beetles there. They're pretty small. They can be in several different colors. They can have spots, no spots, but the key characteristic of these bean leaf beetles, as we see with this arrow here, is this black triangle right at the top of the wings. So that's how we can differentiate the bean leaf beetle from a cucumber beetle or something like that, is the presence of that black triangle at the top of the wings. We also, from time to time, see Mexican bean beetles. They're not real common. They're pretty interesting looking immature there, all spiky, spiny, yellow larvae. The adult looks similar to a lady beetle, so that's something to keep in mind. We don't want to spray lady beetles thinking that they're Mexican bean beetles, so identification is important. You may see Japanese beetles from time to time. We, on the research station in the Tennessee Valley earlier this summer, we saw a pretty good infestation of Japanese beetles in some soybeans, and came back a week later and they pretty much gone, which I think can be typical of these Japanese beetles. They'll move in and out pretty quick, but they can do a lot of defoliation in a short amount of time if given the opportunity. Then you may also see blister beetles, which are important because they produce a substance called cantharidin that will hurt you if it gets on you, for lack of a better way to explain it. But these guys, typically, they're kind of being clumps out in the field. Often you'll see a pickup truck size area in the field that's been defoliated. And a lot of times you go in there and look at it, it's blister beetles. But if you see blister beetles in the field, please don't grab them. They'll get you. It'll hurt really bad. And these defoliating beetles are really part of a complex, really, of defoliating pests in general. We've got several foliage feeding caterpillars that play a role in this complex, and we'll talk about thresholds later. But really, a lot of our thresholds for these defoliating insects are based on sampling to understand what complex of pests are in the field, and then looking at the defoliation of the soybean crop and making a treatment decision based on that. So moving into some of the caterpillars, we've got green clover worms are one that we'll see during the season. A green worm with this white stripes going down. The key for clover worms are the 3 pro legs. So on a caterpillar pest or caterpillars, we have the true legs that are up towards the head. We have what we entomologists call pro legs, kind of towards the back or the middle, and then the anal legs are on the rear end. But a lot of different caterpillar pests that we see in fields, we're looking at pro legs to give us an idea of what pest we may be dealing with, and the green clover worm has 3. Velvet bean caterpillar is another one. It's another green pest with a whitish or yellowish stripe going down the side. It has 4 pro legs. So again, we got the true legs towards the head. The pro legs are more in the back to the middle. The velvet bean caterpillar has 4. And it's important that we understand the pro legs, and we understand the difference between a velvet bean and a green clover worm from this next one in particular, which is the soybean looper. This is a tropical pest that comes up every year and can really do a lot of damage in a short amount of time if larvae are left in the field untreated and build up to numbers to do damage. So soybean loopers are going to have 2 pro legs. There is another looper called a cabbage looper, which is really difficult to identify in the field. So we just pretty much, I think, Dr. Smith, I don't know if you would agree, we probably need to assume we're dealing with soybean loopers.
Yeah, I call them soybean loopers if they're in soybeans because that's we don't have cabbage loopers are not an economic pest of soybeans, but soybean loopers are. And when you get them, you get a lot of them moving in and have a high damage potential, particularly in the central and southern part of the state.
One interesting thing about soybean loopers is they actually pupate on the leaf. So you see an image here of the pupa, kind of the silk spun around it, but so the pupa is actually up on the leaf instead of down in the soil like most of our caterpillar pests.
Could I say one more thing about the loopers? I know some of our field people have always thought that soybean loopers have black pro legs. They do, and cabbage loopers don't. But soybean loopers can have black or green pro legs. So if they're in soybeans, count them all soybean loopers. They have a lot of damage potential, particularly as we approach 5 or so per row foot.
So here, that's a good point. It is just, if we've got two pro legs, a green caterpillar, 2 pro legs looping, I think it's safe to assume it's a soybean looper. There's also inchworms in the family Geometridae that loop like a soybean looper, but they have 1 set of pro legs, not 2 sets of pro legs.
Can we say one more thing here? When we talk about the green clover worms, they wiggle like a velvet bean caterpillar because we can't separate the activity of the larvae like that, but also they loop like the loopers.
That's right.
So we really have to focus on those legs. So the green clover worm is a relatively minor pest. It's very rare that it becomes economic level.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point. And here's just some images of some other, pests that we may or may not see. Beet armyworms, which Dr. Smith already described in great detail, and we mentioned that we saw some a field infested this year with beet armyworms, which you may see fall armyworms, you may see silver spotted skippers, salt marked caterpillars, painted lady larvae, all of these different things. Not common that you'll see, these pests or really anything I'd say, but soybean loopers at threshold levels by themselves. As I mentioned earlier, we're dealing with a complex of different pests that are feeding on foliage.
And the other thing that I've experienced, particularly down in the Gulf Coast area, is some years the soybean loopers will come in before the velvet bean caterpillar, both are semi-tropical pests. Other years, the velvet bean caterpillar may be before the loopers, and quite often there's a peak of one of them followed immediately by the peak of the other one. So you may have the foliating species there for 10 to 20 days at economic levels.
So speaking of the economic levels, so we're kind of using a looking at the plants to tell us instead of necessarily just focusing on I have X amount of caterpillars per sweep or beetles per sweep, because it's not often that we're going to get enough velvet bean caterpillars to do the foliation worth treating levels. So prior to bloom, our defoliation is 35%. That's our threshold, 35% defoliation. From R1 through the rest of the season, we're looking at 20% defoliation. You maybe can bump that up to a little bit higher or a little bit higher percent defoliation later in the year. But when we're trying to set our pods and fill our seed, it's important that we have a lot of leaf area producing photosynthesis to move nutrients to the seeds. And again, the sweep net and the drop cloth is very important to help us know what pests are in the field, identifying which beetles or which caterpillars are in the field. And you see here an image from Marlin Rice of percent defoliation. And one thing I'll say is that we're probably more likely to over-exaggerate the foliation than we are, or overestimate than we are underestimate the foliation. It kind of takes a lot of time and practice to be able to really get that down. The one thing, a new application is developed I learned about at an entomology meeting a couple of years ago. It's called Leaf Bite. So this is a really neat app. It takes a little bit of time, but maybe if you're in a situation where you really can't make a decision today, maybe this could help you. If you pull leaves from the top and the bottom of the canopy, and with this app, you just take a white piece of paper and mark 4 dots, and you can go in and tell the Leaf Bite app, these dots are this far apart. So then it's able to determine the square centimeters on the leaf or on the paper, and then you put the leaf on there. I've got a little video to show you just how quick it is. So it'll pull up. There we go. So there's our leaf that's been defoliated. Snap a picture of it. I can move out the white noise. So now, okay, it's found my scale. It knows how big the leaf is. I can go in and draw to where the foliage is missing on the corner there. And it tells me that leaf is 17.573% defoliated. So it's, like I say, it's a good way. It does take some time. It's a free application. I think right now it's only on iPhones. They haven't developed it for Android yet, but it's called Leaf Bite, and it can really be pretty useful. Like I said, if you just really can't decide if you need to pull, or if you want to test your scouts or your buddies and see who can do the best job with the foliation ratings, that's a good application that's free that can really help you in those situations.
Let me add one more comment here before we move away from the foliage feeders. If you're in the Gulf Coast area, the potential is so great down there that if you see, and it's not uncommon for us to get 50 to 100 small velvet bean soybean loopers per drop per 5 feet. So when you get that, you don't necessarily have to wait till you get 20% damage before you spray.
Right.
If you know the potential's there, they're not going to die out. So you just need to go on and react and not let it may get into bad weather or something like that. So if you see the potential in numbers, go ahead and treat on numbers.
Right. Yeah. If I may be there next week, I'll wait for a storm to blow up and keep you out of the field. That's right. So now moving into the pod feeders. pod worms, also known as corn earworm or bollworm. Not a real common pest for our soybeans, right, Dr. Smith?
And not in recent years. When we talk about 5 or 6 years or so, they've been a very minor problem here. I don't understand why we're have lower numbers than some other states in the South on this pest, but they're just not. It's not happening. We take hundreds of drop claws or hundreds of sweet samples a year, and it's very rare that we find a podworm. There have been some years, probably 5 to 8 years ago, where we had an outbreak, but it's not common. I will say this, where our foliage feeders are more common along the Gulf Coast and southern areas, the podworm has historically been more of a problem in the northern part of the state.
So again, the podworm is also the corn earworm or bollworm. So I think we're probably all pretty familiar with this animal. Obviously, four pro legs. If we're looking at it, in a soybean field, trying to decide if it's a velvet bean caterpillar or a bollworm, kind of the orangish head capsule there is the key. These guys are gonna feed on pods more so than leaves and the foliation. They're trying to get the pod and the seed. The moths are attracted to it, and at the R1, R2 stage, when there's a lot of flowers, they'll come in. They can lay eggs. They also, for whatever reason, really seem to prefer open canopies. So if you've got a late planted crop that's blooming and the canopy still pretty open, that field could be a candidate for podworms. Our threshold for these is 1 per row foot or 3 per 15 sweeps. So this is something, probably historically, maybe not going to run into an issue with these guys, but something we do need to be aware of, because if you get into a situation with a lot of podworms, they can do a lot of damage. So moving into our stink bugs now, we've got several species that may invade our soybean fields during the season. We kind of think of what we kind of term our native stink bugs: the green, southern green, and brown stink bugs, which Dr. Smith talked about with cotton already, and then our invasive, the brown marmorated, and the ever famous red-banded stink bug that's or infamous, I guess I should say. That's kind of the stink bugs that we're primarily looking for in our soybean fields. Depending on the species and weather and things, they can go from first instar to adult from anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. So these are pests that once they get into a field and they kind of establish, they're going to be there for a while. So it's something that we need to be scouting for and prepared to intervene with insecticides when necessary. So here's some images of green stink bugs. Like I said, we've already kind of talked about a little bit, but you can see the hatchlings here when they're still kind of grouped together and excreting their stink pheromone or their stink defense mechanism to protect themselves while they're still small and more susceptible. As they molt and grow, they'll spread out and disperse a little bit more. One of the ways to identify the green stink bug immature is the orange or yellowish shoulders that they have. Then obviously the adult is a big, robust green stink bug. Brown stink bugs, which Dr. Smith talked about already, is kind of a greenish tannish color as the immature. Then it grows into the brown stink bug. There is the adult. Southern green stink bugs are, to me, one of the more prettier, if you will, bugs that we may see in the field. The immatures, as they grow and develop, have these nice pink markings along the outside and down the middle of the back. To me, it's a neat looking immature stink bug. The adult looks similar to the green stink bug. The southern green has some differences in the stink glands on its underside, which I don't know that we really need to get into trying to look at the stink glands of a stink bug, but they also may have alternating red bands on their antennae is another way to kind of help identify from the green stink bug for the southern green. Then the brown marmorated stink bug is a new one that's come over and kind of taken over. We'll see these things in our houses. They're coming in over winter. They're attracted to white surfaces and things, so they're a nuisance for us when we're at home. They're a pest for us when we're in our crops. So they're a stink bug that we certainly need to be looking for. And the immature really is pretty unique looking, at least compared to the brown stink bug. It's more of a brown color. It's got these alternating white bands along the legs and on the antennae. The adults also have those alternating white bands along the eggs and antennae, and then as well along the wings. These tend to be kind of start on the field edges, Dr. Smith, and then work their way in.
They definitely have an edge effect. They seem to be happy just in cotton, for example, going into the first 8 or 10 rows and hanging out there. Of course, they'll go all the way through corn because they've got a long period of time to infest that crop. The couple other things I'd say about this, we think the brown marmorated stink bug is present in most all counties north of Montgomery. And I think homeowners probably have not recognized this pest as much as their field people have, but they are a bad pest in home gardens and on fruit trees and things like that. So we need to be more aware of the presence of this pest in everything, all our crops and gardens.
And then now the hot topic among the soybean entomology community in the South right now is the red-banded stink bug. So this is another tropical pest that's moved in, and when we have back-to-back mild winters, these things can really kind of establish and get growing. We've already had some acres in West Alabama sprayed for red-banded stink bugs this year already. A lot of treatments have been going out in Louisiana as well. So this is for a smaller stink bug, it really does do a lot more injury. So here's a unique for stink bugs. The eggs are laid in rows of 2. They're kind of a grayish, blackish color. Egg mass will be anywhere from 10 to 15 or 20 in a hit of eggs. So here's a picture of the immature stink bug. It looks pretty unique, really. Not a lot of immature stink bugs that look like this red-banded, kind of an oval shape with these characteristic yellowish, greenish markings on the sides and the red and black alternating down the middle. So here's images of the adults. They can really look different. The red band across the back is where they get their name, but it can be red, it can look purple, it can almost look orange or yellowish. It can be very, very faint. The red band is generally there, but it can look different. The key on this pest is this spine here, sticking from between the last 2 leg segments, sticking back up towards the stomach, towards the face. This spine here is how we differentiate the red-banded stink bug from the red-shouldered stink bug. So that's another one that we may or may not see in the field. It's got this red line going across the shoulders. It's a smaller stink bug like the red-banded stink bug is. They're not as big as the green or the southern green stink bug. But the way that we differentiate the two is the presence again here of this spine right between the 2 the last 2 legs sticking back up towards its face. On the red-shouldered stink bug, we do not have that spine. So that's if in doubt, check for that spine to make sure that you're dealing with the red-banded stink bug. So in talking with our colleagues in the Mid-South and doing some reading and things, we're learning, part of this, the reason that these red-banded stink bugs are doing more damage is that they do feed deeper than other stink bugs. Some research has shown that they'll feed up to 2 millimeters deep, while the southern green stink bug, which is a much larger, robust bug, only feeds 1.2 millimeters. And also their saliva is more destructive, and it can spread up to 3.5 millimeters away. So that's part of the issue. Not only are they feeding deeper, but then that saliva can spread and cause more injury on the seed further away from just wherever they probed. They also, interestingly, they'll feed on stem and leaf tissue. So I think that's for water regulation, possibly. But they'll feed on that. So that maybe contributes to the green bean syndrome that we see with these pests. Could explain why we're finding them on vegetative and early R stage beans when there's no seed there for them to feed on. As a matter of fact, I mentioned we've had some fields treated already this year, and those fields were early R stage and vegetative stage, but there were threshold levels of red bandits.
Dr. Graham, you might note that you found these on red clover, crimson clover at Prattville, I believe, or in that area way back before the season started very early, which indicated they overwintered there.
That's right. And that brings up a point there. These stink bugs, unlike our, what we call our native stink bugs, are highly attracted to legume plants. So they're not going to be an issue in cotton, shouldn't be an issue in corn, things like that. But they develop on crimson clover, red clover in the spring, and then move into soybeans.
And let me also add that when we surveyed beans weekly, season long at Prattville last year, and the end of the year, this species of stink bug by far outnumbered the others. In other words, they were the dominant stink bug in the system on soybeans last year at Prattville, Alabama.
So that brings us to our thresholds for stink bugs. From bloom to mid-pod fill, we're looking at 1 per 3 row feed or 2 per 15 sweeps. After mid-pod fill, we moved on to 1 per 1 row foot or 3 per 15 sweeps. But keep in mind, with this red banded stink bug, we're sticking with that lower threshold, 1 per 3 row feed or 2 per 15 sweeps, really through the season. In Louisiana, South Louisiana, places where this is a little bit more consistent pest, I mean, they're mixing in insecticides with their desiccant applications to control red banded stink bugs. Then they can not only can they damage these mature seeds still, but they'll have them, so many in the field that they'll get docked when they go to sell the seeds for the stink bugs being in the mix. So these are, we don't want to necessarily sound the alarm and everybody go spray every acre they got for red bandits, but we do need to be scouting and be looking and make sure we can identify this pest and make applications when we need to. It's important that we stay ahead of them because once they get established, they can really reproduce quickly. And one other point to make, I think, Dr. Smith, is that in our indeterminate beans, where the potting starts in the bottom and works its way up, these red banded stink bugs are going to be in the bottom where the pods are. So they're going to lay their eggs in the bottom, 6 to 12 inches of the canopy. That's where the immatures are going to be. So the sweep net may not always be the most effective sampling strategy. You may need to use a drop cloth or make visual counts, pushing back plants and looking lower in the canopy to find these guys, especially earlier on in the season when the pods are still in the bottom of the plant. So with that, again, we'll just plug our Alabama Crops Report newsletter and our soybean IPM guide, where all of our recommendations and rates and thresholds are given there, and the pest control update, again, something that we put out every week and kind of try to keep you up to date with what we're seeing across the state.
Well, let me just say the pest control update is focused primarily on cotton, but as we get into the later part of the season and we see these semi-tropical defoliators coming in, we'll definitely be talking about those on the pest control hotline.